whereas the 1950s was an age of stars, of performers and faces. The rock and roll of the 1960s was powered by producers, while later there would be Phil Spector and George Martin. First, there was Joe Meek. He was the first producer to use the recording studio as an instrument in its own right, experimenting with echo, reverb and overdubbing within his home studio, situated above a leather goods store in Islington in London. Recorded in 1961, John Layton's Johnny Remember Me was Meek's first #1 production. Johnny, remember me. With a beat seeming to ape the 1940s standard, Ghost Riders in the Sky, and its melodramatic, death-obsessed lyrical content. What marked it apart was Meek's production. Ghostly backing wails, Layton's reverb voice, and that driving beat layered, each element clear in a way that most early 60s pop wasn't. His most enduring moment was 1962's Telstar, played by his studio band, the Tornadoes. For it, Meek took inspiration from the launch of the titular US satellite, the instrumental music of The Shadows, and the organ sound on The Happy Organ by Dave "Baby" Cortez. Space-age sounds like the main claviolin keyboard riff, overlaid humming and a backwards recording of a toilet flush were used to evoke a rocket ship lifting off. And people loved it. It sold 5 million copies and became the first British record to top both the UK and US charts, and won the Ivor Novello Award for Best A-Side. Also produced by Meek in the early 1960s were Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, and their horror-themed jam, Jack the Ripper. Released in March 1963, the garage rock song was immediately banned on the BBC due to its serial killer content, and so did not chart. But its influence was felt in Alice Cooper, Marilyn Manson, and any other shock rocker throughout the years. Meek's final #1 release was the Honeycombs' Have I the Right in 1964. With its stomping percussion and experiments in proto-post-punk. By this time though, Meek was out of step. A new band from Liverpool had taken the UK by storm, and their name was Fun fact, Jerry and the Pacemakers were the first band from Liverpool, produced by George Martin and managed by Brian Epstein, to get a UK #1 single. How do you do what you do to me? I wish I knew. The second were the Beatles. Call on me and I'll send it along with love from me to you. The Pacemakers, Beatles, as well as the Searchers represented a new wave of British rock and roll, known as Merseybeat. Merseybeat was so called as all the main bands were from Liverpool, and their music relied on a solid 4/4 beat. There was also a greater emphasis on R&B rather than the country part of rock and roll. The Beatles had released their debut single Love Me Do in late 1962, reaching #17. Love me do. Before Please Please Me reached #2, January the next year. They released their debut LP in March. After that, they were pretty much unstoppable, and pop music would never be the same again. In 1963, Telstar aside, the US did not care for British music. But by the end of 1964, it had well and truly been invaded by the Brits. I wanna hold your hand. I Want to Hold Your Hand and 6 other Beatles songs had topped the charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Debuts from the Kinks, Rolling Stones and the Animals were released and made roads on Billboard. From this moment on, British music mattered as more than just a regional oddity, but as an international export. No longer the land without music. Finally, the British were coming.